person behind the pro. My name is Mario, the person behind the pro.
I think we are rolling. Hey, Mikolaj, how are you doing? Mikolaj Marcisz, everyone, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thank you very much. How are you doing?
I'm really doing well. I came back from Helsinki like a couple of hours ago. I was very afraid that I would have made it today because like yesterday they started sending me text messages saying tomorrow there is a storm, there's gonna be snow, so be ready for have foreseen disruptions. But and I got to the airport 2.5 hours before, which it never happens for me. I always get there like only 1 hour before, and well, everything went according to plans, and I'm very happy. And then my business trip season is finally over. So until PGC London, I'm gonna stay at home.
Nice. Well, my business trip season ended with GIC in Poznan and basically had COVID for 3 weeks, so I'm good now.
Mikołaj, let me.
Mhm.
So normally, what we do, I think you saw a couple of episodes already of my show. The first thing I do is like I ask you guys to write a little bit of something about yourself, how you are, what's important in your life, and then together with what I find online, and ask the AI, oh, there you go, it started. So and then I ask the AI to put together something, and so together also with an AI voice. So here is your version. So let's listen to it, and then let's start talking about you, and let's start talking about Uncanny. Okay.
Awesome.
Mikolaj Marcisz is a creator, problem solver, and tech pioneer with a knack for tackling big questions and disrupting the status quo. Born in Chicago and raised in the rugged landscapes of Poland by two world-class athletes, Mikolaj's upbringing instilled in him a love for adventure and resilience. His childhood was spent navigating rocks and mountains, an experience that later shaped his fearless approach to both life and work. Mikolaj's journey into game development was sparked by a twist of fate. After losing his account in a popular MMO, he channeled his frustration into creating his own MMORPG, eventually leading to the foundation of Vavel Games. Now, with his newest venture, Uncanny AI, he's taking on the challenge of making games universally accessible through innovative AI-driven localization. His mission? To ensure games reach players worldwide with translations that carry true cultural and contextual accuracy. An entrepreneur who doesn't shy away from opening doors others might hesitate to knock on, Mikolaj has a unique approach to success. Focus on competing with yourself, remain selfless, and let success come as a byproduct of integrity and grit. As a swimmer, climber, and unapologetic nerd, Mikolaj's drive goes far beyond professional goals. He's committed to carving his own path, unfazed by others' opinions. In this episode, we explore Mikolaj's journey, his philosophy of self-driven competition, and his bold vision for the future of game localization. Join us to hear from a true innovator who thrives on breaking new ground, both in the gaming industry and in life.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying like joining us. That's my role. So next time, don't do that. But man, dude, there is so much there that I would like to unfold. But like today is the first episode of or first of a trittico of episodes dedicated to localization and the AI impact on localization.
Hmm.
And so you are my first guest. Then I'm gonna have someone from that works in localization, but from the service provider side, and then someone actually from the developer side. So that's a kind of thing. I want to explore this topic. It's very important for me. Localization has always been something that deep inside my heart. I am a linguist myself. I speak 6 languages. I work for a service provider that we're doing localization. The idea of language has always been super interesting since I was like a 10 years old kid, and I was in the car and I was thinking, how people feel in a village compared to the next village, compared to the next region in Italy. So like, and I was thinking this thing. So for me, languages has always been super charming as a topic. And then we are of course in a phase where AI no need to talk that much about AI, but is really getting there, right? And when it comes to translation, translation itself, if we don't talk about localization, just we start from that, it's already there. We can really say that just translating a text, especially if it's more technical, is relatively there. When it comes to localization, when you really need to give like a decent, so a different, there are nuances, there are it's completely different, right? You need to convey the same message but to another people from another country that they think and speak in a different way. So you and now I'm gonna give you like the stage to say something if you want, regarding what the AI said about you and like your company. But what really struck me in the past was hearing about Uncanny. Uncanny is the company that you founded because you founded Vavel, so but that's a
Yes.
game development studio. And then now recently you found Uncanny, which basically it's an it's a platform to localize game. It's like localization platform dedicated to video games. Is that correct?
But yeah, in terms of the things you said and the introduction, thank you very much for the warm words. I really appreciate it. I think that, well, going back to localization and going around the villages, I think that's the relevant start. As you said, I was born in Chicago, but this doesn't mean that I was automatically thinking in English. That took a lot of work, very expensive education that my parents provided me, because for the first 10 years of my life, I lived in Poland and in Europe in general, because we were traveling a lot.
The Uncanny, so just you're gonna find, like, everyone's gonna find the link in the description. So don't worry if you're, this is like, you can click there, you can see what we're talking about, you can definitely reach out to Marcin. But I'm very curious about, when did you come up with the idea of finding Uncanny? I'm interested in hearing, well, maybe not that much the story. I don't need a story, but I need to understand why you, at some point, from being like a Vavel studio, then you said like, okay, I want to dive into this. Where did you take the AI from? How you educated the AI? I'm sorry for my voice, by the way. Yesterday I was at RovioCon
No
and the
worries.
party went on for long, so I'm recovering a little bit. So I'm interested in how even the technical aspect of your of Uncanny. So how did you build it?
Now, when it comes to gaming, for me, there's quite a few things related to localizations and why am I actually doing it. Now, from the side of Vavel and actually building games, you need to have games localized. I understand this because I'm from Poland, and all the games were localized generally that I played. At some point when I was like 12, or 11, sorry, 10, when I moved to States for a year to study there in preschool. I became fully bilingual at that point, and for me, there was absolutely no difference between English and Polish, and those two languages as blended together. And I just took in culture in whatever native form I read it or watched it. So for me, the aspect of having a game localized was very important because I understood that generally consumers around the world would appreciate it. And if you want to sell more copies of a game, you need to have it localized because people will not be able to access the content. And a lot of them will basically be completely sheltered from it, and they won't ever see your product or project because it's not in Polish, it's not in German, it's not in Lithuanian or whatever language. And this is creating a huge language barrier for those players. So I've been dealing with systems that are related to localization for, ever since I was basically building games. There's always an aspect: how do we add Polish? How do we add German? Or how do we add more languages, and as many as we can? And because my mentality is always go big or go home, I always said, how can we add 100 languages or 150? Because that's how many languages you've got in Google Translate. And because our game industry is dominated really by a few countries, and I'm just going to say Anglo-Saxon and Japanese, that's really what started the games industry in general. Every game was in Japanese in Japan, and every game coming from United States, UK, was always made in English by default, and then it was translated to EFIX, usually as a standard. But the people who think in English primarily, and they do not know under other languages, do not know the nuances of thinking in another language that may have genders, different ways of addressing another person. So it makes it very inconvenient to go from English to other languages. So with that said, when we acquired Imperial Galactic War from Kabam, that was a really large project that we took on as a small studio. I mean, the game originally had over 50 developers working on it, like a $6.5 million budget, and it was not a small project to take on. The localization sheet in the game itself, when we acquired it, had 10,000 lines of text. The localization cost that we received from a friendly vendor was 10,000 euros to get it translated to Polish. I was like, I don't have 10,000 euros to spend on this. Well, first of all, I can do it myself. It's going to take me a while, but it's prohibitively expensive. And, fast forward 5 years later, when we added 3,000 updates to the game, the localization sheet grew to 67,000 lines of text. And the localization cost now for that project would be anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000, depending on the localization language. Also, how do you manage updates, coordination between 50 languages? If you have to do it by hand, it becomes a Herculean effort. And even if you have studios like World of Warcraft that have a $400 million a year budget, they can afford it many times over to pay for all that. But in most cases, they A, do not want to spend the extra money, and B, it becomes a logistics nightmare to get all the LQA and all the testing and everything. And
Okay.
yeah, so that's the biggest problem of running an MMO and running live updates on a language that has a lot of text. So that was the primary reason, and I really wanted to have the game translated into 80 languages or more. So when I started digging, how could we actually achieve it? Well, Google Translate is an option. However, Google Translate, well, is a really good spell checker, but it doesn't really think in a sense, and it just takes the most appropriate or accurate word that it can think of for the specific piece of text. And when you have a white dwarf, it's going to translate it to something like Gimli, being white. However, in a sci-fi game, a white dwarf means the star. And there's a huge difference between białe krasnolud and białe karzeł in Polish, because one can never mean the other.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I was basically experimenting for the better part of 7 years how to do it and creating flows and basically trying to make it work. And then we got to a point where LLMs became accessible and ChatGPT. And this really kicked it off where I'm like, you know what? This is something that we can work with. This is something that can enable us to basically get it localized and to the point where, it could basically pass a Turing's test where the person reading it would not be able to tell if it was done by AI or done by a human at the first glance. So, we've done multiple projects now. I mean, translated over 600 million words, depending how you count it for our system. Like we've had 5,000 individual projects that we've set up and done in batches. Did hundreds of Steam pages, thousands of videos and text files. But with one of the bigger RPGs that we were working on, the outcome was that the translation quality was essentially the same as human translation pre-LQA. So when you basically had a big project and you had 5 or more translators, and there were some minor inconsistencies that could be done between the different phrases, because some words were translated in one way, some in another slightly.
Yeah, let me allow me to jump in here because
Mhm.
like exactly one of the questions that I have prepared for you is like regarding what you're describing now, right? Because like so you described uncanny translations as being almost human level, which is the thing actually very much attract my attention, draw my attention to what you had to say and your product and everything. And I want also to, that's the reason why I also want to put you in reference them with other people like in the industry of localization from different angles and see if we manage to get to a point where we understand a little bit more what the impact that it can have AI on localization. But the question I have for you is what exactly does almost human mean in terms of accuracy, nuance, or nuances, and cultural understanding? Because like but basically, can you give us a few examples where uncanny translation have actually matched or even outperformed? Maybe I don't know. Maybe even outperform a
Yeah.
human translator.
So there are places where AI struggles and hallucinates, obviously. So at this point, most of the people who are listening to us probably are accustomed with ChatGPT and know what kind of errors ChatGPT can return. And the errors that ChatGPT does are true for all LLMs in general. So that's what I want to start with. Now, in terms of the actual benefits and things that our system does better is context. So, especially if our game has multiple languages, a GDD, and other content that we can feed the system, it has a lot better understanding of what is happening inside of the project. Whereas a human usually only operates on a language pair, meaning you look at English and then you translate to Polish, or you go from Japanese to English or Japanese to Spanish. You don't go from English and Japanese to Polish. So the accuracy that we have in terms of the actual context uh, definitely outperforms any human standard, especially comparing the localization sheets that I've seen over the years and from all the clients that we received. So, in terms of actually knowing what the individual phrase means, our system does it far, far better. So, think of translation memory, but on steroids. So, like we know that a baseball bat doesn't mean that it's bazowy nietoperz in Polish. It means that it's a baseball bat for it's not the bird, sorry, a mammal, but it's not the thing that flies, but it's a stick that you hit baseballs with. And if you have disabled settings, it doesn't mean that they are in a wheelchair kind of settings. And this actually happened in a AAA game that was released this year from the Polish games industry. So Deep L and humans can actually do those errors, whereas our system doesn't really do those errors much. It can create other errors. It could break the grammar structures or come up with their own ideas for grammar structure, especially with something like Polish that is really hard to grasp. And even someone like me or you will always have problems getting everything right in Polish. Even though I lived in Poland of most of my life, I still make mistakes, and that basically goes for everyone who's not a professor in Polish literature and Polish language.
Oh,
Um,
for I mean, for a language that has 17 ways to say the number two, yeah. For all the
I mean,
listeners that are here, they didn't
71
know
or
about.
17.
There are 17 ways to say the number two.
I thought there's more.
I think I remember 17. It could be 19. If I remember from reading and I saw in like the list of this. This for me is crazy. But yeah, please continue. Sorry for the
No
anecdote.
worries. So from that aspect, the tool itself makes some mistakes. However, those mistakes are not something that a gamer will ever complain
Mm.
about. you will complain about it because you're a linguist. Every single linguist will complain about it. However, it is the same as an error that you would make in Polish after being in Poland for 16 years and knowing the language. Like I understand 100% of everything you say, but even after 16 years, you will still make one mistake here in a very small word somewhere. And
Sure.
same goes for me, being here for 30 years, I
Yeah.
still make those mistakes, but no one will care about it. It's, the aspect of having your SAT or maturity exam and being able to score 90% on it versus 100%. If you take an RPG game and you literally remove every single comma inside of it, people will still be able to play it. Now, maybe it will be a bit tougher to read, and an RPG is an extreme example. If you just removed every single comma from Baldur's Gate, it would be slightly tougher to read and would be a nuisance. However, from the game design perspective and being able to play through the game, I can assure everybody that with or without commas, you will be able to play and you will be able to enjoy the game. And I'm not saying that our system eats all the commas. I'm just saying that this kind of error is completely inconsequential to a gamer who is stoned and probably just had a beer. And majority of gamers are either children who are still learning languages. So I understand there's reasons why you would want to teach them proper language, but after they go out of school, they usually chill out in the evening, and they really do not pay attention to the correctness of everything. So it's good not to have errors in the high volume parts of the game. So if you have the main menu setting in something like League of Legends, if you have errors in that area, it means that they will be seen by people tens of billions of times. So at some point, somebody will get triggered, especially if you like log into the game every day for 2 years and you see this phrase 50 times a day for 2 years. So this means that you'll see this individual phrase as a user about 5,000 times or more. We're talking about like the main menu, settings menu, the victory screen, the battle summary. Those are the parts where you shouldn't make mistakes, and they should be
Lobbies. The
lobbies.
lobbies.
Everything that's basically gets repeated over and over. So if you could create a heat map to see which parts of your game are going to be repeated, that is important. Now, if you have a your base are belong to us situation somewhere in the game after 20 hours of the game, or better yet, after playing Skyrim for 500 hours, if you have a poor translation of something that was written on a piece of toilet paper in a cave by somebody who was probably a madman 2 centuries ago, who was probably speaking a different language, and there are some inaccuracies in translation, I think that it will actually make more sense that it will be incomprehensive.
There is definitely a general feeling that especially the younger generations are less attentive, are less focused on the actual text and the way that is displayed, just simply because also the way they write, the way they text to each other, it's absolutely terrific. Not terrific, it's terror for me. When I see the way they write and I say, oh, but it's so the whole punctuation, it's actually lost its value. I remember that I had this, a couple of times where like one of my friends were like in the past, she told me, why do you put like a full mark, full point at the end of the sentence? It seems you're angry. And I was like, that's called punctuation. What are you talking about, right? But it's true. I have to agree with you that there is like less attention, less focus for the younger generations. But then,
Not really younger. Sorry for butting in, but
you think everyone?
everyone, and I actually, after the elections in the United States, as one of the statistics I read, that 40% of Americans are actually illiterate, almost. So, and going by my players, and most of my players are adults, they have problems reading anything that's longer than a tweet. 16 words is really where it's at. If it's more than 16 words, you can assume it's not going to be read by 70% of your players. That's like that's
let me
statistic.
unpack that a little bit. So first and foremost, I would say that 30 or 40% of Americans being illiterate. I don't know whether that is true or not, but
Have
if they are
trouble
illiterate, probably
understanding text.
they are not even playing video games. I would
Yeah.
say probably they are for so that that also needs to be put in context, because not and then the second thing, but how do we actually deal with still like the majority of the adults that still care? For example, you're right, me and you were a particular type of people that are very, grammar nazi. So I am that, and when I see the smallest mistake in a translation and localization in the game, I get furious, even the smallest thing. But of course, not everyone is like me on that. Really, I have to say that you're right, not everyone is like us. But language is often full of subtleties, especially in games where tone, humor, and cultural context can vary quite widely. And so, how does Uncanny handles this, especially with idioms or cultural references that might not translate directly? How does Uncanny deals with that?
So there's two sides of that. First of all, if you have idioms and let's call it inside jokes, not even idioms. If you have an inside joke that somebody from, Leroy Jenkins, like only a person who understands World of Warcraft a bit will know what it means to do a Leroy Jenkins, or to do an XPK, in League of Legends, or a backdoor, this is an inside joke or an inside piece of information that only the people from within the community will understand. For that, it's probably makes sense to do a general description. And it doesn't matter if it's AI translating or a human translating. You need to explain this. So really, the way I would like to think about our system is just the same as having a human, and you provide the human with text, and the more context and the more information you can provide alongside that. So, for example, if you have more languages, because it's a AA game or AAA game, and we already have 60 languages, we can derive a lot of that context out of the existing locket and then improve the quality for the rest. If you have an inside joke, uh, just describe it in plain words, what it means, and then the system will try its best to basically adapt to your information to basically make it as accurate as possible. And for very well, it's primarily RPGs and games with story content and with riddles and stuff that can actually block your progression. So this is super important. If you have a riddle that your entire game is based around, that if you do not get the riddle right, people will get stuck. That is also a super important part of the game. And that thing is something that you should have checked. And that doesn't matter if it's AI or a human that does the translation. You generally would want to have LQA, or at least editing or varied editing by another person. And well, that person being human in this case. So we do work with multiple localization studios, the biggest one being TransPerfect, which is the biggest localization studio and company in the world. And, we basically say, all right, well, depending on the budget you have and the size of your project, we recommend, well, either doing a full LQA sweep, or if you want to do a partial LQA, or you want to do the LQA in core languages for all phrases, but for the other languages, we only focus on the 1% of the heavy text, or 10% of the heavy text, or the riddles, the achievements, things that have jokes. So we had a client last week who said, what, like from our like localizate lock hits, the only phrases that are really tough are the achievements, because we have a lot of weird jokes there. So that would probably be good if that was LQA'd. And the status effects are very important to the game because you need to understand the status effects for your character to be able to play properly. And those need to be done well. So in this case, we could only just say, all right, and instead of doing 90% of the text, that should be fine with AI. We'll focus on the variables and the tough text where you have very relevant information for the player that needs to be consistent. And that way we have the MTPE, machine translation post editing, as people are calling it. And just focus on the tough phrases really. And our focus is to make sure that the game is translated into as many languages as possible, while making sure that when we translate it, the client can actually afford it, while also going for more languages. Because in the end, our mission is not to make as much money as possible. Our mission is to get as many games into as many languages as possible. So that's really what determines what we focus on. And if you have a AAA or AA client, we work with big companies. They can afford the full LQA suite that they are used to. However, an indie game developer will need to rely on the community to get the errors figured out and squared off. And that's absolutely fine. It really depends on the type of project that you have. And we have helped a small game that was made by 3 guys get localized, and it would never be localized into more than 2 languages based on their budget. And
if
the game,
even.
it was originally localized only to Chinese, and because it was published by a publisher in China. But the team itself was from Romania and the publisher from Poland, and without the ability to use AI, there would be no way to translate a game that has like 18,000 lines of text and like hundreds of thousands of words. So we do offer grants to indie game developers and discounts to those who really cannot afford it. And those who can afford it basically get a huge discount towards what they were basically paying for before. But it's really about making sure that the game is accessible to more gamers. And somewhere along the way, I know that I'll be making some money out of it. So I don't really need to worry about trying to milk the developers as much as possible. And I feel that there's a problem in the industry right now that most of the localization studios actually do have access to similar tools that I have, or they've been using DeepL. So the amount of work that you would take to actually translate a game has been greatly reduced everywhere. And if people aren't using AI to do a first draft of localization, then maybe for a legal reason, that is still silly in my opinion, or for any other reason they're doing that. But in most cases, the localization studios are, and like this is the main complaint for people, localization studios are using DeepL and then they are proofreading after that, and they're charging the same rate, and the quality of those translation is dubious at best. So a lot of
To make such a claim, you need to say, because I don't know any doing like that, and I in contact with many localization
I'll
studios.
tell you this: I
Okay.
work with 100 game companies, and this is the argument that 80% of the CEOs make. All of our clients, basically, that is the main thing they say. The localization studios are probably already using AI or use DeepL because the localizations aren't good and players are complaining.
I'm sure. Let me
I'm
tell you this.
saying.
Let me tell you this. If you do that in a localization conference, people will just eat you alive, because any localization company I know, they don't. If they do, they say it. There is no one doing that. Whoever has that claim needs to be very careful before saying it in front of companies that actually put their heart and they're into this. They do it with passion. And that's a very strong claim from whoever client I told you that. I
Well,
think as a
it was two
localization
clients.
expert.
Yeah.
Yeah. The partners, the clients.
I wouldn't say it, but
No, of course.
of course. Man, it came. This is a statement that came from like 200 people. Okay, this is not something that, like, literally when I explain to people, they say, I'm pretty, like, the phrase, quote unquote, I'm pretty sure they're using DeepL anyway and they're charging the full fee, is something that majority of people that I spoke with in the Polish game industry and others are saying. Like, I'm not making this up myself.
Well, I think like we could say like that. Like, listen, as an expert in this field, I can tell you that statement is false. And whoever think that
Probably
now,
most are not.
no, exactly. But let me
Not
let me let me tell you,
assessment.
that's false. Now, what the risk is, and that it could be like relatable to what they say, is that the translators anyway, because most of the companies that do localization are using translators that they sit at home, right? Some just they don't know like the work for that company, and then they switch into another. Now, having those tools available, there is a possibility they started using it in the background.
Yes.
But yeah. So that is something that can be said. But I know so many localization companies. I've worked in it, and trust me, no one is using it unless they say, "Listen, your budget is so small that maybe we can do that." If they already have their own tool, or if they do, but they say so. But that's what. So I agree with what they say. I'm sure that there is someone using the Google Translate, or
No,
maybe
no,
that's what
no one uses
ChatGPT or
Google
something.
Translate, or they don't know
But
what they're doing.
ChatGPT or whatever,
To be
some
honest, every single localization studio that I like talked with or I work with uses AI in some capacity to
yeah,
the
of
draft.
course.
Like that's how it is. So yeah, I mean, in a sense, like, just tell me, how is it possible for a translator to say that the settings menu for quality of graphics is niepełnosprawne in Polish?
Mm.
Like, how do you do that? You would either need to be high, drunk,
I agree
off
with
your
you.
mind, or use DeepL. That will
Just for people to understand, just for
yeah.
people to understand, niepełnosprawne
It's like
means
swinging a
handicapped,
disabled. It's disabled,
handicapped,
but it's
disabled. Yes,
handicapped.
exactly, right. So that's a very weird translation that
But it
only
wasn't a AAA
yeah.
game that came out of Poland this in the last 2 months. This is literally something a localization studio did. Shame on you! Like, what the hell?
True,
Like,
true.
whoever did that.
On the other hand, I remember it was the year 2010 or 11, and I remember that one of my colleagues, so it was my first few years here in Poland, and one of my colleagues, like, we were playing Call of Duty, and he said like, the Call of Duty, said like there was a big thing that this Call of Duty was terribly translated in Polish. So, and back then there was no AI. So big mistakes have been done since the dawn of time, right? Like, but yes, but I understand the message you're trying to convey. But for sure there is someone, and in the background somehow might be already doing it. I would say probably is on the side of the translator that is trying to maybe take like a couple of jobs at the same time to extra to so I'm not saying no. I'm not on that. I'm not saying no. But yeah. But like what's the most challenging type of game for Uncanny to localize in terms of maintaining context? Like, do you have an example? What was the most challenging? If of course you can reveal it. If not,
So,
I back off on it.
I don't want to say a specific type, but I will say the specific problem that is always the hardest to translate, and that is custom formats that make absolutely no sense to a person. Like, I read text, I'm like, is this a variable? What is that? Like, it doesn't, like, they like creating your own language and then coming up with a weird structure for a sentence with multiple break lines, code. And then, so like, you have mixture of HTML code, break lines, with variables, and then parts of the variables are, translated text that should be translated or shouldn't be translated. And then you have like a huge blob, and you get to a point where you have paradoxes that you can't actually accurately translate it. So to give you an example, actually from settings, you have high quality, literally the phrase high quality. Now, one of the studios took the word high and they used it in high quality and the high tier of quality of a weapon, quality high, and then they tried to pair it with an armor that was specifically like leather armor. And you will get to a language, and this language in this case was Polish, but there's also probably 20 other languages where the mixture of two separate phrases will not constitute a correct, grammarly correct, concatenation of two words. They will need to be like one will have a gender of the other, and if you just mix it like that, it's impossible to get that right. And it doesn't matter if it's done with AI or not. Things like this happen a lot because of inexperience. And if you have a game done by experienced developers who have done 20 games before and went for the localization process, that is always simple. But if you have a studio that hasn't done that before, that is always going to be the most challenging. And I mean, that's the same for AI or lack of AI. But we have methods to deal with this, and we do work with translators to provide additional extra quality for the
Okay.
studio.
Okay. Do you believe do you believe there are still areas where AI struggles to fully capture the essence of a game?
I mean, I think that's true for any aspect of look like using AI for any part. It is in the end, it's an over glorified not spell checker, but proposal for what you're gonna write next, if that makes sense. Like that's just literally how, like, it's the same thing as when you were typing on your phone and you had text prediction, except this is a trillion times more advanced. So in essence, there will always be things that AI will struggle with, but that's the same thing for humans. And I think that the main issue is that you need to have those very large language models that require multiple thousands of gigabytes of RAM to operate, and it just gets to a point where it's super expensive just to run a single query. So I'm sure that at some point it will become a lot more efficient. But for me, and I also didn't tell one more important story that I just wanted to share why I'm doing this, and I see we're getting closer to the hour.
Try to encapsulate it a little bit because, as you said,
So very quickly, my mom, who's 63 years old, is playing RuneScape like an addict. She's retired, and she plays RuneScape like 8 to 12 hours a day.
what?
She used to be a professional climber, like world-class athlete, and she used to train climbing 8 hours a day. She was a national champion for 16 years, like 12 years in a row. So she knew dedication, and it's like she was a hard worker all her life. Now she's retired, doesn't really have much to do, so no grandkids yet. So basically, she plays RuneScape nonstop. She finished Warframe and had like 7,000 hours clocked in Warframe. And then I'm like, you know what, you're gonna like RuneScape. So she learned RuneScape. Now the problem with Warframe's localization in Polish is that it just sucks because it's like basically Google translated almost, it feels. But for her, it was good enough, and she was quite happy with that. There is a really poor, for me, it was like unbearable to play. I only played Warframe in English, and I love Warframe as well. But for her, that was like fine, because in RuneScape, there is no Polish. Absolutely. There is tens of millions of words in the game. And how do you even get that localized to more languages? You need to focus on effics. You can only do French, Italian, German, Spanish, that the main language is Chinese, maybe. But then you ignore the Serbs, the Latvians, the Polacks, the Lithuanians, Estonian language, Czech, and all those other demographics that basically are completely devoid of a big portion of the internet culture just because it's not viable. Like, what about the entire continent of Africa or India? For For India, you can say, well, but it used to be a British colony, so everybody speaks English there. Now, I read the statistic that only 100 million people speaks English at a good level in India. So what about the 1.3 or 4 billion people that are excluded from this school? And I'm pretty sure they would prefer Hindi if they speak Hindi, or Kannada if they speak Kannada as a native language, because that's just how it is. Like imagine how smart I am in Spanish. Quoting a certain character from a TV series, Gloria. So, from that perspective, my mom struggles with Polish, struggles with RuneScape not being in Polish and has to Google Translate big portions of it. And let's just say that when you have a wiki page in RuneScape about smithing steel bars, and in one point the bar says rebar, the other one is drinking bar, one bar is like a belt for your tooltip or your belt, and you're trying to understand how to turn your iron ore into finished product in the video game, it actually is relatively hard. So like my goal is to make it so that it's actually understandable in most cases. And then if the client can afford it, basically make it prettier so that, language nerds like me or you can play it in the other language without getting aggregated by seeing weird mistakes here and there. But in essence, like our translations, and we've done lots of games over the last year, basically do not get negative reviews for translations. If there are translations comments, the translation comments are really about the actual quality, but they usually are positive. So it's like, well, the language could be better, but it's a positive thing, because people are appreciating that they actually have the game in Korean, while before it wasn't in Korean, and so that's a nice thing to do for gamers, I feel. I don't know if you still have time for one more example. I think you're muted.
Yeah. No. Yes. I was just right. Like, because it was a very good. So let's see, with editing, but like still you have gone around the question.
Which one?
Because
Sorry.
right, like it was super interesting. And actually, by the way, your mom is amazing. I wish one day I need to meet your mom. I really have to, because like that sounds like a really
Can you
super
please
good
repeat the
story.
question so that I can?
Yeah, the question is like, if you believe there are still areas where AI struggles and that it can still be improved.
Of course. I mean, it can always be improved. So the grammatical correctness, more languages added. Technically, ChatGPT and Gemini, they currently support like 100 languages, but try getting Welsh in ChatGPT, and it's not going to work out really well. I'm pretty sure that over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see some really big breakthroughs in efficiencies. And I really can't wait to see what especially Google and Facebook will do, because specifically Google, and while OpenAI is Microsoft, Facebook has a really huge pool of language text. They had this model that they released last year that's 100 billion 100 billion parameter at 100 languages to 100 languages. But this is basically like Google Translate, and you can use it for translating chats and stuff like that. So it allows you to understand in a communicative way. But also, this only requires 80 terabytes of RAM to run on a GPU. However, for something like ChatGPT 4, nobody really knows how much, but like this is not public information aside for the companies that work on those models. But generally speaking, those models have like 10, A100 GPUs clustered together, each one having like 100 gigs of RAM. So you have 1 terabyte of GPU RAM, and you run this model. Now, what I personally believe will happen soon is you're going to have Google with the 20 years of Google Translate language burst, and they're going to feed it to Gemini, and you're going to see an explosion in quality of translation that, you know, will basically close a lot of the barriers. So I think this is something that will be coming. Right now, we don't have enough GPUs to support the proper models. And I'm talking about having higher quality outputs that just require larger models and more compute
Okay.
power. But that is basically coming at some point.
Okay.
And well, Uncanny will be ready for that.
That's good to hear. It's good to hear. So like, I see that like I think I share with you. So I want to talk about the actual impact that we think that this has. This is actually the core of the topic. What we want to discuss, especially, is like the future or the present and the future. To be honest, because I really feel that the future is now. That's a big has been like a big brand it's a big marketing thing. The future is now, but it really is. I
The
feel, and
future
the
is
feeling
here.
I have, it's yeah, yeah. The future is actually has arrived, and you haven't realized it's been sitting next to you for the past like 6 months. But jokes aside, so the feeling I have regarding localization and AI, and then you tell me what you think about it. But I'm quite sure we're very aligned with this. Is that so um, we are already there with the translation and with the localization, and it's just needs to improve still a little bit to be like really human level. But it's gonna be there whether we're talking about a year or 2 or 3, but we are probably gonna be there. So therefore, the use of human translation itself is gonna decrease significantly. That's
Yeah.
my prediction. So or at least the feeling I have, right? Rather than a prediction is more, it should be more informed. So mine is more of a feeling, seeing what companies and LMM are capable of doing it, like you, for example, like Uncanny. Um, the feeling is that human translation is gonna decline slightly, but surely. And LQA is gonna be something that it might actually increase in the future,
Yeah.
rather than the current state of things. Because like so the let's call it, I like to call it the machine, is gonna do the translation, is gonna do localization. Then they're gonna need even a stronger LQA settings to be able to catch, like as a safety net, to catch all the mistakes that the machine, allow me to use that, I like to call it the machine rather than using acronyms and stuff, but like, or the AI is going to be capable of doing. And then LQA will be working as a safety net. So LQA work, and the four companies you LQA are going to see probably a growth in the revenue streams on that side, while they're going to see a reduction in the financial aspect of like the intakes that they have from that discipline. Whoa, do you concur with that? Do you disagree, or
I,
you have
I
different view?
partially agree, but there's some things I could add to this. I mean, I'm sorry, I mostly agree. So, like, I mean,
Sure.
I can't say no to what you just said. But here's like the first prediction: German, French, Italian translators, a lot of them will lose their jobs. Okay, because right now the ability for us to translate using AI, like for at least for Uncanny, like we offer the same rate of quality with human like post machine translate MMTP, machine translation post editing. We charge 1 cent per word, and you get the same quality as you would for human translation and the 3 cents for editing. I mean, it's the same. There's absolutely no difference. You get a human to read through the text twice, and it's basically the same thing. So that's the first aspect. So we're going to have a lot more translators to Indian languages. You're going to have a lot more Arabic translators, Serbian translators. So in essence, I think the amount of money that we spend on localization will be constant, but 80% of that money will go towards LQA and will be distributed from the EFIGS languages to the other languages. So even outside of G20, because it's going to become viable to have a game always localized to 100 languages. A friend of mine from Crafton said that in his opinion, in 2 years, it's going to be a standard that every single game will be translated to 100 languages. That is basically where the industry is going to head
I
to.
totally agree.
And I think that there is also going to be some moral issues along the way because there is a huge resentment from a lot of game studios towards their existing vendors for essentially charging the same rate while you're still using AI as drafts. And it's fine to use drafts, but I'm just saying, what is the sentiment from the game developer side? And I'm here just representing game developers as I'm also a game developer. And the reason I've built Uncanny is to solve a problem for myself. And then I said, wow, this is a bit uncanny. It's a bit creepy how well this works. And I realized that if I saved $5 million, then if every game had access to the tool that I've built, like the amount of savings would go into billions. Essentially, we're currently at $50 million essentially saved for developers, and we really just want to make sure that the games are accessible in all languages, regardless if you're from Africa, India, Poland, or Pakistan, or China, or wherever. You deserve your game to be translated in your language, and in the end, the quality that you get is just going to depend how big your demographic is and what is the budget of the game, and really that's it.
Okay. Oh well, that So I concur. My 2 cents on that as a follow up is that I agree. I don't know if we're gonna translate into 100 languages, but definitely the array of languages in which video games are gonna be translated is gonna have a multiplying factor rather than addiction, right? Rather than addition. So if for sure we're gonna switch to the 40, 50, and then 100
60
maybe
languages for
at
sure.
least.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Like 60, there are, as you said
It
before, there are.
makes sense based on the amount of millions of speakers. We have done a lot of analysis on which languages to go for, and we have basically picked the 80 most important languages that each have like over 10 million or 5 million speakers or like substantial population. Because like for example, Israel, has 3 million people or 4 million people that speak Hebrew, but they are like a lot more value added from the perspective of localizing in a video game than
Yeah.
some other poor demographics. Let's call them that basically cannot afford to spend money on your game.
Exactly. That's the core of the conversation, right? I mean, you can have in India there are like billions of people, of course, but like the amount of people that actually can play and spend money on your game is relatively small. So like, of course, but still, well, India is just
20
specifically.
languages that are official, really.
Exactly.
So the top 12 of those languages are worth translating to. Because, I mean, what I like to say to people is that there is 40 million people who speak Canada, and there's 32 million Canadians, like.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, just even if you take the language Marathi from from India, that's like it's a huge, chunk of the population.
Like
So
100 million people at least, I think, or 80
something like that,
more.
exactly.
So it's like more than half of Europe basically speak language, and the argument is, well, they were a British colony, so we're not going to translate for them. Screw them. It's like I don't like
Exactly.
this kind of thinking, and that's why we have Marathi as a supported language in Uncanny.
Oh, beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. And then, of course, to me, and here we need to start wrapping it up a little bit. But it's that one thing that definitely I find a increased value of AI translation and localization is that, as you already mentioned before, we can definitely help all the small developers that they did not have the possibilities to translate their games, right?
Yeah.
So if they had the budget, they could translate it, and they needed to pick like two languages, right? And then, depending, then you need to also do some market analysis where my game is like mostly is more popular, and therefore, and then I will translate it into, I don't know, German and Chinese, or German and French, I don't know, whatever. And in this new world, I think we can open up, and we can just have them translate their game, at least in the main 12, 15, 16 languages, depending, of course, on the budget allowing, of course. But still, we have, you have managed to cut costs so much that every small Joe that makes his own game, if he had like €1,000 to spend, can think about translating at least in a couple of languages. So that's definitely an added value that we appreciate, and it
Yeah,
should
like
always be remembered in this
with,
type of conversations.
if I may add to that, like our rates for standard users, not enterprise, is 100,000 words for €200. For enterprise users, it's for €100 per 100,000 words. So if you have a small mobile game, it literally might cost you $25 to translate it, or €25 or like whatever. So this is basically the equivalent of eating two kebabs. And the first invoice that we did at the company was for a small studio of my friend, and he had this game called Infinite Minesweeper, and he's super happy with us because his revenues increased fivefold. Now most of his players are from Russia and Japan. He said that it's crazy how the game performs in Japan, because like the Japanese players on average play 4 times more in a session than they do in any other demographic. And it would be impossible for him to do that without basically AI and our help.
True.
So, and
True.
another thing that we also I like to do is, when I help with a project, I also put in the hat of a game developer and studio head, creator, or whatever you can call it, and like said, oh wait, you know what? This is something that you need to do. This is something that you need to adjust. For example, your description of the store, and then you're going to have more people coming in, because like your general description could be improved. And we sometimes even just do it within the time working on the project, because we offer other creative services, not just localization, but we are game developers first, and translators second. That's our goal, to like make games accessible and focus on the actual user experience rather than just the linguistics.
Okay. Well, thank you. I had, of course, like a lot of other questions, but like in a way, you kind of like replied already to many of those in your long exacerbation of like, your points were like so long that you kind of like covered all the angles that they wanted to cover, and also asking you things. But I think we covered all the most important things. So now so this is all the time that we have for today, but I wanted to thank you very much for having, for coming out, for talking about Uncanny, for talking about you. We didn't have much time to talk about you yourself as a person, which is actually the the core of this podcast. Normally we talk about people, but localization is a thing that I really wanted to tackle. I really wanted to talk about this, and you were the first one of this critical. Soon, in the next couple of days, I'm gonna record with 2 other people. Let's see what comes out. But so for everyone who has listened to Mikolaj, you can check the links here below. Uncanny, thank you for watching. Stay tuned, and also like watch the other episode. And hey, if you managed to get till here, I think I deserve a like, subscription, whatever, like please help with that, so that we can reach more and more people, and we can make more and more people watch and listen this video or this audio, depending on which platform you are watching or listening to, and we can spread the word about localization and the future of localization. So thank you, Miko.
Thank you, Pietro.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.